Let's go to that story that Tom mentions about the waterways of England. Are you surprised to discover that just 16%, as Tom says, of England's waterways are rated as having a good ecological status? It's due to many factors, including pollution from sewage, runoff from agriculture. The government's target of 77% looks rather ambitious, 77% classed as good by 2027. And today, the OEP, the Office for Environmental Protection, describes the government's efforts to clean up England's rivers, lakes and seas as poor and says it will miss its targets by a large margin. In a moment, we'll speak to the chair of the OEP. First, Charlotte Sawyer is member of the Conham Bathing Group at Conham River Park in Bristol, which is seeking ecological status, and joins us now. Charlotte, good morning.
Morning.
Are you surprised to hear this damning assessment of England's rivers, or as someone who swims rather a lot in them and has been campaigning on the subject, has it come as no surprise at all?
No, I'm surprised at how unsurprised I am. I'm a bit disappointed how jaded I feel about it, really.
Why? What have you been discovering about England's rivers where you are, and in particular your dealings with the local kind of bureaucracy that shows that they're dirty and need cleaning up, and the efforts to clean them up aren't working?
Well, it's the lack of understanding, the lack of checks, the lack of testing, lack of investment nationally that frustrates us, which is why we focused locally in our campaign for designated bathing water status. And then bureaucracy has really got in the way. So we do the testing ourselves. We're going to do the first test of the swimming season on Friday. I'm going to drive the sample to Wessex Water, doing the Environment Agency, the government, and Wessex jobs for them, all because it's not being done and there's not that sense of urgency that we feel.
Why have you? I know you've had to create a sort of Avon Charter, which is, if you like, a kind of mini version of the national framework. Why do you not trust the national framework? Why is it not working?
Well, with our charter, which we've consulted with the community, we're trying to get across the technical perspective and the community perspective. The government legislation doesn't have any of that community element to it. They don't use local data, local knowledge, and we're trying to use the voice and the knowledge of the people, because we're the people who love the river, we live around the river, we see and unfortunately smell all the things that are going wrong, and we are such a resource. We're creating this policy document. I've made a feature-length documentary film about it, and we're screening the film locally. We've invited members of our council, and they've started to say they're coming in June. And we're going to present this charter. We're going to work through it with them. And we're going to show that the community perspective and the community knowledge is a resource that can be used.
All right, Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. Let's speak to Dame Glenys Stacey, who's chair of the Office for Environmental Protection, joins us now. Dame Glenys, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you just take us through your main findings? Pretty shocking stuff that I read.
Right, so we've taken a detailed look at one of the key pieces of law relating to the quality of water in our lakes, rivers, aquifers and other open waters. And we found the legal framework to be generally sound, but it's being interpreted and implemented poorly. And that means government is, as you say, likely to miss by a large margin important targets for improving the quality of our waters in England. Now, there's a number of serious issues here, and I do empathise with what Charlotte is saying about the lack of a local perspective. So plans are required for individual stretches of water by law, but in practice, those plans are much too generic and they're pretty hard to follow as well. They're not usually specific enough to individual waters, and instead they tend to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach when we know what's needed differs from one stretch of water to another. And then these generic plans, such as they are, they're not being implemented at pace or even to particular deadlines. Instead, they tend to be open-ended.
And for those, Dame Glenys, who aren't sort of following, who aren't necessarily campaigning on this issue, but sort of hear the news constantly, all this talk of sewage, can you just give us, as you zoom out a little bit, with your vantage point from the Office for Environmental Protection, why is it that so many of England's rivers are so dirty? Why have they got so much sewage in them compared to other countries?
So the current issues are pretty well known, aren't they? You mentioned sewage, and yes, that is an issue, but actually it's not by any means the biggest issue. Pollution from agriculture is a real problem, and also runoff from roads and urban areas. And there's also concerns about the presence of chemicals in our waters from industry, pharmaceuticals, insecticides, and personal care products. So there are, as well as the established problems, there are now some high-risk pollutants on the horizon, and really government's thinking about those needs to develop. It's at an early stage at the moment. So we are overloading our rivers, in short, and we're not doing enough to clean them up.
And in economic terms, you could look at water as a utility. Utilities are regulated. Has there been a failure of effective regulation of water as a utility in this country?
So the failure here is about planning, really, implementing the law in earnest. When you step back from it all, it doesn't look as though government is planning for success here. I mean, within its own plans, it estimates that 3 in 4 rivers won't get to this standard, only 1 in 4 will. I mean, that doesn't sound very encouraging, does it? So what's really needed here is a real redoubling of effort now, and a positive, purposeful attempt to plan properly at individual water body level, and then get on with it.
Dame Glenys Stacey, Chair of the Office for Environmental Protection, thank you very much indeed.